this video, I'm going to show you how to recreate the chordal intro to Boards of Canada's Sunshine recorder using Novation's Peak synthesizer. Okay, so firstly, I'm going to set oscillator 1 and 2 to square waves and bring both of their levels up on the mixer. I'm going to set oscillator 1 actually a bit higher than oscillator 2, so the detuning doesn't become too crazy. If I then go to the oscillator menu, I can set the divergence between the voices. I'm going to set that to about 70, and then the drift between the oscillators to about 20. So if I then play that, you can hear we're getting that kind of nice detuned sound, but it's changing every time we play a voice. So we're already partway there to getting that kind of weird warpedness. If we then change the filter cutoff, we can start to get this ramping up of the filter with one of the LFOs. So I'm going to get LFO 1 to make this modulation, which I could do with this knob here, but I'm actually not going to do that. I'm going to do it through the mod matrix instead. This is because I can set the unipolar output of LFO 1 to change the filter cutoff. And through doing this, we can kind of set the start point of the modulation with the filter frequency, and then actually set the end point with the depth. So I'm going to set the depth to about -30, change that to a sawtooth. We start to get that nice rising ramp. Okay, so we're starting to get there now. I'm going to just take that rate down to 116, slow it down a little bit. And I'm also going to set the filter slope to 12 dB per octave, just so the filtering isn't so steep anymore. If I bring the resonance up to about 60, that will accentuate the filtering slightly, and it just gives us a bit more power to that thonk that happens at the end of the ramp. I'm going to bring the overdrive up to about 65 as well, just to really properly drive the filter, and the key tracking to about 100 rather than the maximum 127. Okay, so we start to get this kind of sound. So we're starting to get there. If I go into the LFO menu, I'm also going to set common to LFO 1, so that all of our voices play to the same LFO. So we're starting to get there now. We're starting to get this kind of interesting, rhythmically moving sound that's actually starting to move in pitch. It's worth noting that we can actually bias the LFO 1 depth on the panel, so that's quite useful. I might actually just set it to about -20 there, just to give us a bit more oomph. But it's good knowing that if we take it back to 0, we've still got a basic motion there. So if I set the attack and release of the amplitude envelope to about 100 each, might bring the attack down to 90. And get that nice kind of smearing of the notes together with one another. Okay, so now I'm actually going to use LFO 2 to modulate the pulse width and the pitch of our oscillators. So I'm going to set the rate of the LFO 2 to about 150, and I'm going to change its type to sample and hold, so that gives us a randomly changing waveform out of LFO 2's output. So I'm now going to get LFO 2 to modulate a few things in the modulation matrix. If we go into slot 2, I'm going to select oscillator 2's shape and set source A to the bipolar output of LFO 2 and set the depth to about 30. So now you can hopefully hear that we're getting a bit of, if I mute oscillator 1, you can hear that the LFO 2 is changing the pulse width there. So although that's giving us a kind of random shift of pulse width, it can get a little bit distracting. So I'm going to go into the LFO menu and I'm going to bring the slew rate up to about 120. Now, slew is really useful in patches like this. All it's doing is actually smoothing out the wave shape from that LFO. So you can kind of see it on the LED here. Rather than getting these really kind of sharp jumps in brightness, it's actually smoothed that out, and we can hear it within the pulse width itself. So it's nowhere near as distracting now. And what I'm also now going to do is actually take that LFO and apply it to the pitch of the oscillators. So I'm going to first of all just go to the oscillator 1 pitch and set the source to the bipolar output of LFO 2. Let's take the depth to about 5. Let's go into the next slot. I'm going to get the second oscillator pitch to move in the opposite direction to the first one, so we kind of get more of that divergence effect. So that's really now starting to get there. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get LFO1 to also change the pulse width of the oscillator slightly. I'm going to do this actually on the front panel by using the LFO1 buttons here on the shape modulation controls. I'm only going to take it up by a few notches on oscillator 1 and down by a few notches on oscillator 2. So again, we just reinforce this divergence of the waveforms between the two oscillators. And all that's doing is it's just making the harmonic structures of the oscillators ever so slightly brighter as the filter opens. So next I'm going to add the final icing on the cake in the chorus and delay and reverb. So I'm going to set the chorus level to about 60 just to add a bit more of this kind of warped effect to it. I'm going to go for type 1 for this and set the rate to about 26. And now we have this slowly shifting chorus. It's very subtle, but it's just adding a bit more of that kind of unison sound. And I'm going to bring the delay in a little bit as well. Set the time to about 42, so it's a bit quicker than the default. And bring the feedback up to about 65, about midway. So you should hear every time that LFO ramps up, you get a nice kind of little trail of echoes between. And then I'm going to just bring a little bit of reverb in, set the level to about 50, set the type to 1 again, and the reverb time to about 30, just so we get a nice, again, a nice kind of bit of diffusion on the sound. That's really starting to sound like the two dudes from Scotland.